Good evening, Erev Tov, and good day to all our friends wherever you are. Happy belated 4th of July celebrations. My name is Ruby Shamir, and I'm the Executive Director of AIFL, America-Israel Friendship League in Israel. I'm happy to host you on this webinar, which is focusing on a virtual gallery tour in New York City. I would like to introduce to you our guide, Gabriela Vainsencher, who was born in Buenos Aires, raised in Israel, in Tel Aviv, and has lived and worked in New York since 2004. She is an artist who makes porcelain sculptures, videos, photographs, and drawings. And she's currently preparing a large installation for a show at the Bronx Museum opening in October. Gabriela has taught art at Williams College and Hunter College, and since 2014, she has been giving lectures and leading tours about contemporary art in New York City, where I met her the first time and continued with her guidance. Today's lecture is a virtual gallery tour through two of New York City's most vibrant and beautiful art neighborhoods, Chelsea and the Lower East Side. We asked Gabriela to choose her favorite exhibitions and bring them to us today, celebrating independence through artistic expression. She chose 4 exhibitions that are as diverse, fascinating, and beautiful as our art world is, and we will see them soon. I would also like to introduce Wayne Firestone, the moderator of this webinar, my colleague, Executive Director of AIFL, America-Israel Friendship League in the US. Wayne, please.
Ruby, thanks for kicking off from Israel. We're excited to be celebrating Independence Weekend here in the United States and with our friends in Israel and around the world. And Gabriela, what a present you're bringing us today. Many of us haven't been in a gallery in quite some time. We're just sort of creeping our way back to it. I have actually been to the outdoor gardens you're going to show us right up, so I'm very excited to see that. I want to ask everybody in the chat. We have people calling in from all around the world, art lovers, independence lovers, lovers of something fun and interesting to do virtually in the afternoon. Maybe it's a hot day by you, but tell us what you, maybe you could quickly put into chat the last time you were in a gallery, what exhibit you saw, where you were in the world, just a little taste of something that has stuck with you from that art encounter. Today, we're going to have a special one. And as Ruby said, Gabriela has chosen very carefully as a master guide of what we're going to get to see with themes that relate to independence. So Gabriela, go ahead and share with us a little bit first about yourself, and then about how you got into this and how you've been touring during this miserable period where we're all locked up in our cabins, and then take us to another place.
Sure. Well, thank you, AIFL. Thank you especially to Ruby, who invited me to do this, and to Wayne and Jonathan and Giovanni and Cassia and all the crew at AIFL. It's been a pleasure to work with you so far. So like Ruby said, I'm an artist. I make a lot of different things. I make sculptures and videos and drawings. And in all these years that I've been in New York, the studio is really the center. The artistic process is the center from which I do everything else that I do. I'm also a curator. I also write about art. I teach art to undergraduates, and I give lectures and art tours. And my focus is contemporary art. So contemporary art just means art that is being made today and is relevant to us now, from all over the world, with my focus, the way it is being exhibited in New York City's galleries and museums. And my approach is always from the artist's studio. So when I look at an exhibition, first I want to understand, what am I looking at? How was it made? And what does it mean? What did it mean to the artist when he or she made the work? And what does it mean to me as a viewer? And what I think it could mean to the people who I take with me to see art. And that's exactly what I'm going to do with you all today. So like Ruby said, I've been giving physical tours in New York for quite a few years now. And in the past year and a half of the pandemic, basically what I did is I translated my physical tours to galleries and museums in New York into this Zoom platform. I also give them on a regular basis to my clients, many of which are flung all over the world, are no longer in New York City. A lot of Israelis went back to Israel. A lot of people from different parts of the US left during the pandemic, are now coming back. I actually find, I know we all suffer from Zoom fatigue, I'm sure, but I also find the platform extremely useful and inspiring, because often there are things that I can only show you on Zoom and I couldn't have shown you physically. For example, the first exhibition we're going to see today was a beautiful public sculpture that left New York just a few weeks ago and is now on UPenn campus in Philadelphia. So I'm able to show more things. Today we'll also meet some of our artists, some of our artists will either hear them talking about their process in videos, short videos that I brought you, or we'll see pictures behind the scenes of how they make their work. To me, this is all part of my thesis, which very simply put is art is something that is made by people to give meaning to their lives and to give meaning to the lives of the people who see the art. And that's where I'm coming from. So I want to dive right in. You'll see as we go through the exhibitions, Wayne said something about your theme being independence through creativity, and you asked me to say something about that. I think the biggest independence that we can have, and that independence is greatly respected in the United States of America, is creative expression, is the ability and the permission to make whatever you want to make and display it publicly. And I'm very happy to participate in that today. So let's start. I'm going to share my screen. Okay, there we go. So before I start, I just want to tell you, we're going to look at a lot of exhibitions. You're going to hear artists' names, galleries' names. You don't have to write these down. These will be sent to you when you ask for a link to the recording. You can always email AIFL for these names. So if you forgot something and then write it down, you will get it. So we're going to start from an artist named Simone Lee. Simone Lee is going to represent the United States in the Venice Biennial next year. The Venice Biennial is like the Olympics of art. For those of you who don't know what it is, it happens in Venice, Italy every 2 years. And many countries around the world have pavilions in which they select the artists that will represent them. There's also, of course, a competition. Someone wins the Golden Lion, etc. So this will be the United States representative. Simone Lee is 53 years old now, and she was born in Chicago to Jamaican parents. And I wanted to show you this particular piece. It's called Brick House, and you see it as it was installed on the High Line Park in Chelsea. The High Line is a beautiful outdoor art garden and public park in New York City that was made out of disused train tracks, and is one of the biggest successes of public parks in the world today in terms of how many people have seen it. And here is Simone. I just wanted you to see the person before we start talking about her work. And I also brought you a picture of her in her studio. Simone Lee is first and foremost a sculptor of ceramics. She is a ceramicist, in which to say she makes vessels, but she also makes large sculptures in clay. And you can see she uses various armatures under the bigger pieces. But I just wanted you to see her in action in her studio before we look at some of her work. So we're going to go back in time to start with an exhibition she had with what used to be her gallery in Chelsea. This is Loring Augustine Gallery that provided us these installation images. She's now represented by a different gallery, Hauser and Wirth. But this is a show that brought her to the attention of a lot of New Yorkers right before the Highline Commission was announced. And you can see even here from these first images, the different sizes that she works in, both ceramic sculptures that can fit on a coffee table or on the floor, small things, as well as large, imposing sculptures. And her starting point has always been the female form. And what I love about the way she depicts the female form is this combination that she uses between a very realistic way to depict a human body, right? This doesn't look like a fashion model or even an idealized necessarily form. These look like real arms or real stomach, real breasts, right? But also when we look at that face, and I'm going to zoom in a little bit for us, this face is made out of little rosettes made out of porcelain, which is a very delicate clay. Then we start to get into the world of symbolic imagery, right? A face that is all a flower, a face that doesn't give us facial expression, doesn't give us features. So on one hand, this figure is both very real and very symbolic, right? We can kind of introduce any face into that figure. A lot of her sculpture, for those of you who know a little bit about ceramics, you can see she is a master of her craft. She knows her glazes, she knows her shaping. Often when we do see features, facial features, they will be visibly African-American features. This is something that's very important to Lee. We'll see also the hair, the theme of braiding, the theme of even the rosettes, and this kind of more abstracted hair can be seen as an afro. So while the figures are not specific people, we're seeing a specific kind of beauty, a specific kind of representation. And what I love seeing sometimes is how artists go to abstraction. So here you can see how the braids of the hair, which are very recognizable in this early sculpture, turn into this more abstract kind of braiding in this sculpture that was more abstracted and then was on the floor at the gallery. So after a lot of these shows and exposure, she got this amazing commission to make Brick House, which is the name of this sculpture. It's a 16-foot tall bronze sculpture. And I brought you a few pictures from behind the scenes from the studio, the foundry in which Lee made this project. So you can't make a bronze sculpture by yourself. You have to go to a foundry and they have to help you do it. She made a smaller version in clay that was then cast in bronze. And this was used as the inspiration for the larger sculpture. But you can see that very quickly it got different details. Here it is in the process of construction. This is a huge thing. She made it in clay, 1-to-1 scale. She built it in clay and then they made molds out of it and cast the molds to a 1-to-1 bronze sculpture, including the braids. This is just to give you a sense of the scale. This is Simone Lee looking at it right before it got its patina. Patina is also a very long and arduous process of painting it on and then burning it to give it this kind of shiny black, very deep color. And here it is on the Highline. I wanted to show you some of the inspiration for this particular form. So we've talked about her emphasis on African-American, on Black beauty, but she went farther and she talks a lot about these. They're called Telik dwellings from Cameroon and Chad. These are mud houses. The technique of making these is slowly going extinct from the world. There are very few masters of this type of handmade architecture. So this was one inspiration for this kind of body of the sculpture. But another one is this incredible looking restaurant in Natchez, Mississippi called Mammy's Cupboard, which, by the way, this is a more contemporary photograph of this restaurant, but I found you a picture of the same restaurant from the 70s. You can see the skin color of the Mammy figure is much darker, and it was later painted lighter to try to make it less racist. But Simone Lee was very interested in the vernacular of how to take language that talks about Black women as women who give and as women who serve and make the culture that we live in possible, and how to enlarge that image, make it stronger, and give representation to young African-American girls and women. And what she talks about a lot when she talks about the sculpture is she says, I was imagining the 15-year-old girl from the Bronx who is walking around the city, and instead of seeing more generals on horses as public sculptures, she sees someone who looks more like herself. She sees someone who has cornrows. She sees someone who has a nose like hers and a mouth like hers. And she says one of the reasons that she didn't give her brick house figure eyes was that she wanted each and one of her viewers to be able to project herself into this figure. So she is recognizably a young Black woman, but not a specific one, a more generalized one. Here is an aerial view of how it looked on that part of the Highline Park. So this is a sculpture that you can now visit if you go to Philadelphia. Like I said, it's on the campus, on the UPenn campus, and it's open to the public. But it's at ground level. And what I loved about the way it was installed in New York is really how it kind of looked over on the street. So this is our little taste from the Highline from Simone Lee, who I can't wait to see what she's gonna do for the Venice Biennial. And now we're gonna go, like they say, to something completely different. This is an exhibition by Walid Beshti. Walid Beshti is a Los Angeles-based American artist. He was born in London to a Libyan father and an American woman, an American mother. And he grew up in Pennsylvania, and he went to Bard. So he was kind of all over the East Coast as a young man, and eventually settled in California, where he now has a professorship. He is, on top of being a very well-known photographer who shows his work all over the world, he's very respected professor of photography in many, many art institutions. And this is a show that he had at Petzl Gallery, also in Chelsea, one of my very favorite galleries in New York. And just to show you the scale of this thing, before I explain to you what exactly we're looking at, I brought you a picture of myself. This is pre-COVID with a group that I brought to see this show, to show you how huge this installation is. So often people ask me, well, what is an installation? And what's the difference between an installation or an exhibition? And what I say is that an artwork, when you see a sculpture or a photograph, you are standing outside of it or in front of it. When you walk into a room and you are inside an artwork, then it is an installation. An installation is creating an environment, a complete environment for us to be in. So before I dive into this installation and explain to you how he made it and why he made it, I want to take you back to the body of work that kind of put Beshti on the contemporary art map in his career. And it is this series of sculptures. We are looking at a almost shattered glass box on top of a FedEx box. Here's another one of them. And the way these sculptures were made is Walid Beshti in his studio. He sends one of his assistants to the FedEx store. He tells them, please buy all the boxes that you can buy, all the pre-made boxes you can buy at FedEx, and bring them back to the studio. He then custom makes for each of these boxes a glass box, which is what you're seeing, but he tapes the inside with this kind of transparent sticker to hold it in. And he sends this box, he puts it right into the FedEx box, no bubble wrap, no nothing. He sends it to the gallery, and the instruction is, whatever comes out of the box, that's what you show. And instead of using a pedestal, please use the box that it came in. And that is what the galleries did. Of course, when they take the boxes out, any one of you who's ever sent a box in FedEx, this is our worst nightmare, right? Like, this is what will happen to the glass box that we send someone if we don't put bubble wrap on it. The boxes hold their shape because he's, put that transparent sticker inside, but they hold on their surface everything that's happened to them, right? All the ways in which they've been dropped and scratched and bumped and shattered, they hold their history in them. And he calls it, and this is a little bit of a joke, he calls it a collaboration with FedEx. FedEx does not know that they are collaborators in this process. But of course, what he's really saying is the collaboration is with the world. The artwork is not over when the artist finishes making it. The artwork then leaves the studio, goes out to the world, and things happen to it, just like they happen to us, right? He's not the first guy who's had this idea. Many of you know Marcel Duchamp. We know him from his famous fountain, which was a urinal that he showed in an exhibition in 1917. But one of his most famous artworks is this one. It's now, these days, it's at the Philadelphia Museum of Art. It's called the Big Glass, the Large Glass. And you can see it is also shattered. This did not happen on purpose. This happened when this work, which is a painting on glass, arrived at the museum. They took it out of the crate, had a heart attack, called the artist. And when he saw it, when Marcel Duchamp saw the large glass shattered like this, of course, they put all the pieces back together. He said, now it's done. Now it's finished. I'm not going to make a new one. This is the work. And so this is not a new idea, but it's the same idea that Beshti has of the artwork can change in its lifetime. And it carries both the meaning that it had for the artist when he made it and the meaning of what happened to it later. So let's get back to this installation. And before I explain to you what we're looking at here, I want to bring Beshti himself to tell you a little bit about the work. So this is an interview that Beshti gave when this show was shown at the Barbican in London in 2014. So this is an exhibition that has traveled. It's a 2-minute video. You're going to hear the artist talk about the work, see him a little bit, and then we'll keep going.
The exhibition consists of 12,000 cyanotypes. Well, actually, the project consists of 12,000 cyanotypes collected over the period of 14 months. What you have on display here is just one calendar year. It's materials that were exhausted or used up while the studio was producing work. So what you see on the wall are cellulose-based or paper-based or wood-based waste materials or byproducts, really, of the production of my work and also the production of this show. The blue tint, or why they're all blue, they're all coated in cyanotype materials, potassium ferrocyanide, which is one of the earliest photographic printing processes. It's a very simple chemistry. It's just coated. You can coat anything that's paper-based or wood-based that will absorb it, and it's just washed in water to fix the image. And what these are basically photograms of objects that were used in the production of work in the studio, and also objects that were broken or used up or exhausted in the process. So you have waste materials or byproducts of the productive life of the studio, and then you also have imaged on them non-paper-based things that were used in the productive life of the studio. So in that sense, it's a work that kind of tells the history of its own coming into being.
So that last thing that Beshti says, it's a work that tells the history of its own coming into being. We could have said that exact same thing about the FedEx pieces, right? A work that tells the story of its own coming into being. And that's one of the things that I love about Beshti, is that he changes techniques. Every time he makes a new project, he'll work with different materials, different methods, but he has certain questions that go like a thread through his work. And one of the questions, or one of the things that are interesting to him, is this thing of how can an object tell the story of its own coming into being? How can an object hold its own history in it? So these works are cyanotypes, like Beshti explained. We also call these things blueprints or sunprints. You can buy a kit to make your own sunprint at a Blick art supply store. Kids in kindergarten make these. It's a very, very simple technique. What you do is you take any kind of absorbing material. It can be paper or wood or cardboard, or in the case of Beshti, all the stuff that goes through his studio, packing materials, contracts, little notes, a page from his checkbook. He also used, here's a close-up of that from Bank of America. Boxes of things. You take any kind of absorbing material, you basically paint it with potassium ferrocyanide, which is a light-sensitive solution, and then you put something on it. So in the case of Beshti, things that were in the studio, water bottles, phone chargers, a wrench. Sometimes there's things that are really, really recognizable. I see a computer cable. You can sometimes really know what they were. But sometimes, like in this image from the checkbook, sometimes they're objects that we don't know what they were, and they kind of create these beautiful abstract images. So you put the thing on the paper, and then you put it in the sunshine. And the brighter the sun, and the longer you put it under the sun, the bluer, the darker the blue, the print becomes. And when you want the process to stop, you simply rinse it with water, and you have a blueprint. So here is Beshti in his studio. This is the studio where this process was made. As you can see, he's working on a lot of different things in his studio, an installation, some videos, some large-scale sculptures. While they were working on all these different projects for a year, he had his assistants on the side make this cyanotype project for over a year, for 14 months, resulting in over 12,000 individual pieces. Now, these are never shown or sold separately. This is one work that's made out of 12,000 pieces, and it's always shown floor to ceiling. It's what we call a site-specific installation, meaning that it changes its shape depending. This is at the Barbican in London, and this is again at Petzl Gallery. So every time they show it in a new space, they're going to have to reconfigure this kind of Tetris of the objects to fit the space. So this is a project that in a way is a self-portrait of Beshti's studio. It's a portrait of the year that in which it was made. And the last thing I want to show you from this project is the poster that the gallery made to publicize this. And you could have also taken a free poster. They had a stack of them at the door. It had two pictures, one on either side. I'll show you both of them. Here is one side. And by the way, I'm going to tell you the title of this show. It's long. The title of the show was Abstract of a Partial Disassembling of an Invention Without a Future, Helter Skelter and Random Notes in which the pulleys and cogwheels are lying around at random all over the workbench. So even that poem kind of sounds the way this artwork looks, right? And this is the picture they used to publicize the show. Instead of showing like a detail or a beautiful installation shot, they're showing Beshti here at left and one of his assistants at right installing the work. They're showing us, oh, they had to put tape down on the floor, and they had this little rig that could take them higher up. On the other side is another one of those pictures. Now the rig is being pulled up almost to the ceiling. And in a way, even the poster, which was produced by the gallery, is a work that tells the story of its own coming into being, right? So this is a way in which the gallery could kind of participate in the creative process along with the artist. They made their own version of an image that tells you how this show came into being. I also think it's an extremely generous way of presenting a work because it shows all the people that it takes to make this project. Both Beshti and Simone Lee that we just saw, you know, once you grow into a certain scale of art making, most artists really can't do it all by themselves. They need assistants, they need techs, they need studio managers, they need a whole community of people to help them create their vision, much like a movie director can't shoot and star and write and do the lighting and the makeup in their own movie, right? You need a crew. And so I thought that this poster also celebrates the communal aspect of the studio work. So that was Walid Beshti at Petzl Gallery. And I know, Wayne, that you are collecting questions on the chat. So we'll have...
Gabrielle, let me just throw in one that we have from Mira that it's sort of, I'm thinking about it in terms of both of these artists you presented so far. It's a question from Myra. Do artists speak about what their pieces represent, or is the interpretation left up to the viewer? And I was wondering how, with these two artists anyway, whether they're a continuum on this.
So, you know, artists are people and people are different. So some artists do and some artists don't. That's kind of the short answer. And the longer answer is, like you just saw, Beshti is a very eloquent and clear speaker. He is an artist who explains his work. He is also a professor. You know, he's used to teaching art. So he's used to talking about his work. He gives many interviews. And he explains, you know, that line, a work that tells a story of its own coming into being. I didn't make that up. He did. And then there are artists, and also Simone Lee has spoken at length about her work. Everything I told you about the Mammy restaurant, about that architecture, about representation of Black beauty, that comes from the artist. It's not something that has been put upon the work. There are artists who say less about their work and leave it more up to the people who write the texts, the curators. But today, I think we are increasingly, with social media, with just the way our culture is, we're increasingly in an age in which artists often do talk or write about their work, even if it's, you know, a little bit.
And one more question specific to Beshti. Given how you showed how his installations looked very different in different settings.
Yeah.
How much does he instruct as to the placement of those pieces, and how much is it like the FedEx package that it arrives and it's just, you know, it is what it is?
So that's a huge question for a lot of artists like Beshti, artists in which the work, you know, a lot of the work is the way you hang it on the wall or the way you put it in the space. And it's kind of a long-term question, because as long as Beshti is alive, he usually travels with the work when it's being shown at a museum or a gallery and can direct the work, and obviously has a lot of input about how it's shown. But then what happens to his legacy? Right? And we are starting to see, you know, installation art has already outlived a lot of the people who made it. And then it's a question of the curators kind of reconstructing the vision of the artist. So some artists will take very detailed pictures, will leave very detailed written instructions, and have kind of a very tight hold on the way their work is made even after they die. And some artists don't leave a lot of documentation for whatever reason. And then the curators, the people who work at the museums or the galleries, they're kind of they become almost like detectives / psychics And they try to kind of hunt down evidence of how this work has been shown before, show something like that, or try to imagine, okay, if this artist was here and now we're showing this at the Guggenheim Museum that doesn't have one flat wall in the whole museum, but actually you have to see it in a spiral, how would they do it? And you kind of try to imagine what they would say.
Well, we've got lots more questions, but I'm going to hold off for now because I know you have two other amazing installations to show us and work.
And
so let's move to that, and hopefully afterwards we can come back.
Yeah, and I'll leave some more time for questions for sure. So this is the youngest artist we're going to see today. So Simone Lee is in her mid-50s, Walid Beshti is in his mid-40s, Rina Detrice, who is just turned 30 this year. So she was born and she still lives in Kansas and kind of travels to her various exhibitions from there. And this is a show that she had in a smaller, I wouldn't call it tiny, but it's a smaller gallery in the Lower East Side called Spencer Brownstone. And Spencer Brownstone Gallery shows a lot of young artists, up-and-coming artists. And she is I think, one of the most interesting artists they've shown in the past few years. What you see when you walk into the gallery is this thing. It looks like a rug that's one color, right? And when you come closer to it, you realize that it is made out of sand. This is not a rug at all. I mean, it looks like a rug, but it is just sand. There is no glue. There is nothing but this kind of reddish sand that Detrice collects and kind of brings around to make this sculpture wherever she makes it. She's kind of a traveling artist. I'm just bringing you some pictures so you can get a feel of what this looked like. And let's do a little close up on this. You can really see the texture of the imprinted sand and the way she creates this pattern in it. And the nice thing about having an art tour with someone who's an artist who lives in New York is that I have sometimes access to some behind the scenes materials. So I've actually shown with Spencer Brownstone Gallery, so I'm buddies with them and I love working with them. And so when I told them I want to do a lecture about Rina, they gave me some pictures of the way she made this piece. So what I'm going to show you is not something that you could see had you come to the gallery. These are pictures from the week that the gallery was closed, between exhibitions, how Detrice makes this work. So this was just taken by the gallerist iPhone. Here's Rina a week before the show starts. You can see on the left, there's still the paintings from the previous show. Also by a wonderful painter who I went to grad school with. And she starts the show like this. There's a plastic tarp on the floor. It has a grid on it that she paints with a Sharpie. And here she is in white. She's standing next to her materials. So in these little buckets, I'm going to show you, is the sand. And to our right, we see her work table with her tools. So let's get a little closer to her work table. It's like an IKEA tabletop that she also carts around with her. Here is the blueprint of what she's going to do. It's tacked on the wall, and here are her tools. Let's look at them a little closer. Maybe some of you already recognize what these are. I'm going to do a little zoom in. These are pieces of soles of shoes, sneakers, clogs, sandals, that she cuts up and then glues to a piece of wood or rubber so that she can hold them. And these are her brushes and her, pencils. This is what she makes her work with. So the way she does it, she has her blueprint here that corresponds, each square in this blueprint corresponds to the square on the plastic tarp that we saw. She starts in the middle. She pours some sand out. She smooths it out. This is like a painter's tool, what you use when you're grouting something and you want to make it smooth. She smooths it out. And then she starts making the pattern on it using her stamps that she made out of sneakers. And you can see She always wears white, so there's a performative element to this process, even though she never shows this publicly. These are just documentation pictures. But there is something that feels kind of like a ritual. So she goes out from the circle, from the center out in a circle, adding sand, smoothing it out, and making the patterns. And she'll keep going like this. I have a few more photos for you until the pattern is complete and until she goes over the plastic. So the plastic stays underneath, but we just don't see it when it's done because she goes right over it. And the end result is that spectacular and clean rug that we saw. As you can see, there are no guards, there are no ropes. This piece just sits, just sand on the floor. They don't open the windows during the duration of this exhibition. And maybe some of you can already imagine what happens often to these pieces and what, in the case of this particular work, happened about 17 minutes into the opening. I can tell you because I was there. Of course, someone just walked right through it. It wasn't clear whether this woman did this on purpose, whether she was looking. I was standing next to Jay, who's the director of the gallery. He changed many colors and then chased this woman out of the gallery. It was a whole scene. And I went over to Rina, to the artist, and I asked her, like, oh, how are you doing? And she said, this always happens. No big deal. And she came back and fixed it later. But, you know, I think she said this happens a lot. She said often, sometimes people just don't believe that it's sand and they have to check with their foot. Sometimes sometimes it's vandalism, but it's very rare that people do this on purpose. And she said often, people are just on their phones and they don't even realize what they're doing until they're standing in the middle of the artwork. But she said she didn't take it too hard. And I think, of course, and maybe some of you have already had this kind of reference in your head, she makes work out of sand, right? How can we not think about Tibetan sand mandalas? And of course, we know that this is the most important moment of making a mandala, right? Not this moment where the monks have created over sometimes months this very intricate design. Actually, sand mandalas are not made out of sand. They're made out of crushed up rocks that it's a little bit heavier than sand and it stays in place a little more. This is the most important moment of the mandala, right? The moment in which very ceremoniously it's swept away. And the point of that, and I'm not a Buddhist expert, but I can tell you my layperson explanation. The point is, life is transient. We are transient, just like this. We will all be swept away. So let us enjoy and appreciate and revere the beauty of life as it in its very transience. And of course, here's Rina fixing it a few days later. But you know, of course, with Rina, there's an added meaning, I think, in her work, because let's think about the materials and the tools that she uses to make the work. The work is made out of sand, and it's made using shoes, right? So the very instrument that can destroy it, us walking on this, is the instrument that creates it. So in a way, this work already has encoded into its DNA both its creation and its destruction. I just wanted to tell you that the gallery then wanted to bring a guard and put like tape all over the space, and the artist did not let them do that. And they had a very long back and forth about how they're gonna preserve this show for the 2 months that it was up. And this was their compromise. So there was one sign at the entrance that said this: artwork and exhibition is fragile, please be cautious. And there was one more sign in front of the artwork saying very clearly, please don't step on the artwork. And that is as far as she let them go. She wanted the work to still be, in a way, at our mercy. She didn't want it to be protected from us. And she always does this. She makes these works in museums and many other places, the point is this kind of unwritten contract between us as viewers and the artist, saying, I will make my art and I will hang it in a gallery and then walk away, and you will come to see it and you won't destroy it. And this way we can keep being together in this art world. I'll keep making it, you keep looking at it, right? I think that's why whenever someone comes and vandalizes a famous artwork in a museum, it makes headlines, because I think it's an outrage to some extent. It's an outrage of an unwritten social contract that most of us really adhere to most of the time. So this is Rina Detrice at Spencer Brownstone Gallery. And I'm going to jump ahead, if that's okay, Wayne, to the next and last show.
Jump, jump, jump.
Good. Okay. I brought you a picture of the artist at the opening, just so that you see what a COVID opening looked like. As you can see, masked and empty. This is the show at the Whole Gallery in the Lower East Side in Manhattan by Roxanne Jackson. She's the dark-haired woman on the right, and Caroline Larson, our honorary American for today. She's actually Canadian, but she lives in New York. And this is a two-person show they had at one of my favorite galleries in the Lower East Side. It's called The Whole. Now they also have a brand new location in Tribeca. And it was a two-person exhibition, meaning that they shared the space and really kind of thought about the show together, even though these women don't work as a collaborative pair. They are each individual artists, but they had a show together. Roxanne Jackson is a ceramicist and a sculptor, and she made these vases. And Caroline Larson is a painter. She paints in oil on canvas, and she made the paintings on the walls. So let's take a slightly closer look. I wanted to show you a little bit what we call installation shots, just so you see how the things sat in the space. I think there was also a very beautiful decision about the pedestals for Roxanne's vases. Roxanne and I are buddies, by the way, so I also brought you some pictures from the studio, and I know her process. She's a great woman. Look how she decided to create mirrors for the pedestals. So you can kind of see the vases all had this echo in their pedestals. They were reflected in their own pedestals. And the pedestals were painted in colors that were the same color as the wall, or colors that kind of echoed off of Caroline's paintings. So we'll start from Roxanne Jackson's work. As you can see, she is, on one hand, a very traditional ceramicist. She makes vases. She makes big vases with this kind of coloration that we recognize from Flemish classic, both Chinese and Flemish pottery, the blue on white. By the way, hers is not china, it's not porcelain. She actually works with a sculpture clay that is more forgiving and less fragile. But of course, she adds these, she's kind of a punk rocker, Roxanne, and you'll see pictures of her soon. She adds these luscious lips with the gold teeth, right? There's a little bit of kind of a hip hop sensibility also to some of these expressions. So in a way, she's both a very traditional, she hand makes these vases and then fires them. She lives in upstate New York now, where she has her own kiln and her own studio in her home. But we see that there's also a lot of traditional decorative aesthetics behind the work. And I said a little bit about Chinese pottery being an inspiration. And we see this motif of koi fish and of nature. It's really a mashup of the history of porcelain and of pottery and of glazes. She, by the way, is also a sculpture professor. And there's something, while very wild about her work and very funny, there's also something sometimes, and I say this in the best way possible, didactic about her work that teaches, because it does contain so much of the history of pottery. I brought you some pictures from the studio. I just love seeing things as they look in the studio, sometimes even more than the way they look in the gallery later. There's just something so alive in seeing things as they're being made. Here's Roxanne in the sculpture phase of the work. So she makes these, the vases, she puts the mouths on it, and she uses a lot of different kinds of stencils to create these designs. I think she was amazed that this giant vase actually made it out of the kiln. And I love seeing this because you really see her chops as a sculptor before she puts the glaze on it. It all becomes kind of glassy and perfect looking. So here's the vases before they went into the kiln. And I'll remind you what they look like at the end. So Roxanne is on these pedestals, and around her on the walls are Caroline Larson's paintings. And we'll start from this one. It takes a moment for the eye to adjust to all this color and all this action, but what you see are two vases with flower arrangements in them, right? So on one hand, like the most traditional thing to paint, right? A vase with flowers in it. But of course, like Roxanne Jackson, with a twist that's a little bit surreal. Look at the eyes inside the flowers. It's a little bit strange. On one hand, we know this is a oil on canvas painting, but there's something about it that looks different. So I wanted you to see a close-up of how these paintings look. Here's another one. She makes these paintings with pastry bags. So, you know, when you make a cake and you want to make a decoration on it and make a rose or write happy birthday mom, use a pastry bag with a little nozzle at the end. That is what she paints her paintings with, only she fills them with oil paint. They take a very long time to dry. I brought you a picture from, a few pictures from Caroline's studio. It is messier than my studio, I'm glad to say. And you can see all the pastry bags all around. This is what I was talking about. I'm gonna zoom in a little. So she mixes paint here, and then she fills her pastry bags, and that is what she paints with. So she starts with a drawing. This is a drawing directly on the canvas. Here's another one. She posted these on her Instagram. That's how I found them. Then there's a little bit of an underpainting. You see that pink wash, and then she starts filling in with the bags. She works both horizontally. Often she'll start working on a table, but then they dry upright. I also brought you some pictures of studio disasters. So this is what happens when she puts a little bit too much paint on, and it all kind of like blobs down, and then she has to scrape the whole thing off and start again. Here's another little disaster. It all goes in the trash, and then she has to start again. But the result are these incredible, almost woven-like paintings. They almost look like tapestries. By the way, she is represented by Gordon Gallery in Israel. So she's also had a few exhibitions. She has a few galleries, and the one in Israel has had a few exhibitions of her work. I brought you here even the title of the work. It's called Still Life with Italian Valseresio. I hope I'm saying that correctly. Mid-century ceramic vase. And I said, let me Google that. And because these vases are really very interesting. And that's when I found out about Valseresio mid-century Italian vases. I brought you a picture of them. So while she's a painter, she is also very interested in ceramics and utilitarian ceramics and the history of design and art as it kind of coalesces in these vessels. And a lot of her paintings actually reference known styles of ceramics. So that's a nice connection that she and Roxanne Jackson have. So I'm just gonna show you a few more of the paintings in the show here. There's 5 vases. And these vases are also inspired by real-life mid-century Italian ceramic styles. So I thought this was such an inspired match to have Caroline Larson and Roxanne Jackson together. They're both clearly very interested in each other's worlds, like in the world of painting, in the world of art history, in the world of ceramics. And also they both reinterpret very, very classic, and some would say very staid, very old forms of making art and really bring them into the 21st century. And the last thing I want to say about the show is, again, the galleries kind of coming to the artists with another creative gesture. So the whole is usually a white cube, what we call a white cube. The walls are usually white and they don't have this molding. Do you see this molding along the side of the wall? They painted the walls and put the molding up, especially for this exhibition. And I think what they're trying to say, and it's totally done by the gallery, is they brought an aesthetic that is a little, a home aesthetic, a home design aesthetic, by using those panelings, which we would see more in an office or in a home than in a contemporary gallery or museum. But then they painted everything with that crazy lime green, kind of bringing that weirdness into the gallery. So I'm always interested in the ways that galleries can respond creatively to what their artists make, rather than just put up the white cube and be very kind of sterile about it. So that's it. That is our art walk through the art galleries, my favorite exhibitions from the past year or two in New York.
Gabriela, we couldn't possibly have covered that much ground if we were in person. Let me get in a couple of real quick questions.
Sure.
There are a lot of questions and chat and discussion going on about transient art. And let's just start some of the basics. In working with sand, is it a wet sand? Is it a dry sand?
Dry.
So it is a dry sand.
It's totally dry.
And as opposed to the Tibetan form that you talked about, the intention is that it lasts the period of the exhibit, as opposed to, and then it's gone, right?
And then it's gone. And then it's gone. So, what she does is, when she is invited to do an exhibition, she comes in person. Again, this is going to be the question. I hope she lives for 100 more years, but eventually she will not be alive. And if museums want to keep showing her work, someone's going to have to recreate this. There's no way a museum is going to you can't hold on to a piece of sand without it changing.
And certainly Rena described a desire for some interactivity, I guess, with her audience, not necessarily stepping on her piece of art, although there seems to be a sort of poetic beauty in that. At least some of our audience members feel that way. Others feel very strongly otherwise, as you can imagine. But I guess one of the things that you're showing us, these four very different artists reveals in very different venues with different durations intended for their exhibit, is that it really does matter where you're seeing this. And so if we go back, to the very first exhibit from Simone, do you think the experience of the brick house will be very different in Philadelphia than from the High Line?
I do. I think that being in a different city, being on a university campus, seeing the work, on one hand, I think there was something kind of more grandiose or amazing, right, about seeing it here on the High Line. But there's also something very human and very grounding in seeing this work on the ground in Philadelphia. That is a very, it's a city that has a lot of both history and present of gentrification, of especially the neighborhoods where a lot of the university campuses are. So I think seeing this figure, maybe it's like less of a wow effect than seeing it in Manhattan. I feel like anything you put in Manhattan has a wow effect. But in a way, I think the effect is almost stronger, just on the ground in the middle of this campus, surrounded by young people, many of them people of color. So yeah, the meaning of the work really changes depending on where you see it and when you see it, both in your life too, right? Who you are, where you are in your life, that's also going to change the way you read the artwork.
Well, Gabriela, you have shared with us so generously 4 artists who I feel certainly are to be celebrated on a weekend celebrating independence. Each of them has created something that's a gift, whether 100% of viewers or only a smaller portion of that love their work is obviously in the eye of the beholder. But what we really intended today was to think about independence in a more universal way. Mm-hmm. And I think part of what you showed us with the different artists and that you love so much is how much that can enrich our lives, how much that is an expression of independence and freedom that we value as a country, and that Israel and the United States in their own creative ways are contributing, maybe even disproportionately to some new innovative art forms that even during very, very difficult times can lift other people up. And I hope that is something that emerges from this COVID period, certainly, that all these artists that have been sort of trapped inside and trapped with ideas will somehow emerge with new creations that we couldn't have even imagined otherwise.
Absolutely, yeah.
So Gabriela, thanks so much for being with us over Independence Weekend and taking time from your family. We want to thank everyone here. Most of you know we usually do this on Sundays, so we're not with you on Sunday. Thanks for joining us on a Monday, which is a holiday for many of us. We are back to our regular schedule on Wednesday, so we hope you'll join us again. Our program on Wednesday is called Second Chances, and it's another look at a different look from the lens of 2 different Army veterans, one American, one Israeli, about how they reconstructed their lives and found healing after being maimed and or suffering trauma. And these really are truly inspiring stories. So I hope if you're free, you'll come watch us. If not, you'll check us out on our YouTube site and view all the links that we provide everyone for free. Thanks for being with us today, celebrating independence, and enjoy the rest of your weekend and week. We look forward to being with you for many weeks to come throughout the summer. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Bye-bye.